We're going to have an absolutely interesting conversation. I know my two children are here because it's on psychedelics. And I have no idea why. So I'm going to hand you over to Philip and Rosalind. Good night, Liz.
Thank you, Emma. That was wonderful. Let's take just a few moments to settle. These events are so full of excitement and warmth and joy and connection. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels good just to take a few moments just to settle and pause and connect into our centers and our deep self. And just sort of orienting ourselves, the fact that we're in this tent in the Abbey grounds, getting a sense of where we are with the grounds of the Abbey when we're here, just by this wonderful hexagonal or octagonal abbot's kitchen, and then the tour over there in the distance, and sort of the energy of this place is so wonderful. Just feeling the land beneath our feet, and then the sky all around us. And these big trees that are in this area by the marquee as well, the presence of these trees, and we can imagine that their roots are going right down, they're kind of underneath us in the soil, which is alive and full of thousands, millions of organisms beneath our feet. And here we are in this special place. And I better stop now, because if you were up at 4:50, I might send it. So here we are, and I thought I'd like to tell you what happened after I gave up the role of being the chief. There were a couple of months of peace and quiet, from June when we did that wonderful online ceremony with Emma, and I handed over the role. And then Stephanie and I did our own Samhain ceremony on November the 1st. And as you all know, the Samhain is such a magical ceremony, and there's such a kind of sense of completing one phase and then moving into the new one. And then a few days later, there's that saying, when one door closes, another door opens. It's not always true, but it can often be true. And a few days later, somebody asked to come and see me, and her name was Dr. Rosalind Watts. And she came in for a cup of tea one afternoon on about November the 4th or something, wasn't it? A few days later. And told me about the project that she was working on. And then the following day invited me to join the project. And I never in a million years would I have thought that I was going to get involved in a project like this. But it's turned out to be the most fantastic project that we've been working on for about 18 months or so now. And what I wanted to do is share it with you and have a conversation with Rosalind where we can talk about this project with you. So she told me about the revolution that's occurring in psychiatric medicine, in psychotherapy, in the use of psychedelics to effect healing in a whole range of problematic conditions such as depression, PTSD, and so on. And I was kind of unaware of this happening, actually. And I had been aware of the power of psychedelics to induce real change way back, towards the end of the early 70s, really, where Stephanie and I explored the nether regions, I was going to say. The century, it was in the days of Tim Leary and Ram Dass, so it was really embedded in the spiritual context. And that was when, having been studying with Nguyen, studying Druidry for several years, being really interested in spiritual traditions, suddenly we were having deep mystical experiences as a result of these. And yet, and yet we also became aware of the downsides. Friends of ours who became casualties to that kind of the drug culture that was prevalent in those days. And my sister, who took LSD around the same time, and that triggered a psychosis in her, and she became schizophrenic. And I spent the next 50 years visiting her in a home, and that was really tough. She died a couple of years ago. So I was well aware of the risks. So what I don't want you to think is that in this presentation I'm in any way promoting the use of psychedelics in a way that's inappropriate. So Rosalind told me about this work, and then after you left, I researched it, went online, and saw that there was this whole revolution occurring. And you invited me on board, didn't you? And but it gets even more extraordinary, because one of the reasons why I think you invited me is because of my interest in Druidry and in the trees. And Rosalind had developed a way of working with people using the power of trees. And so she was combining, or is combining, a scientific understanding of the power of these medicines, also with a deep spiritual connection to the trees and to the forest and the wild. And maybe we could start by, what we're going to do is we're going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then if you have any questions, let's have a discussion about it. So Rosalind, it's lovely to have you here. It's so nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely to be here. I've loved it.
Great. And how did you? So you're a clinical psychologist. So you had a career in the NHS, didn't you? And how did you move from the NHS into getting into this kind of work?
Well, so initially, when I studied English literature for my undergraduate degree in Birmingham University, and at that time, magic mushrooms were legal. So I lived in a house with a flat with 8 bedrooms, 7 other women, above a shop called, it was called Amsterdam of London, and it was in Birmingham. And it just had fridges full of fresh magic mushrooms. So my 3 years of university, unlike many of other friends of mine that were there that didn't live in this particular flat, they were drinking beer and having kind of, netball and hockey initiations, and we had magic mushroom sessions, essentially group therapy, for 3 years that we were there. And that was a profound insight into the world of magic mushrooms in this kind of group therapy container, in a way, this informal group therapy container. And then kind of, went and became a clinical psychologist, forgot about that time of my life. Not forgot about it, but it was kind of, that was my university time. Magic mushrooms became illegal. And then it was only when my friend became quite unwell with depression. She had tried all the different treatments and antidepressants and a whole range of medications, all of it, yeah. And none of it had helped, so she had then decided to go to Peru and have an ayahuasca ceremony. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic, like magic mushroom, similar effect. And it had been very, very profound for her. Her depression she's one of the few people for whom it actually just kind of
lifted in one go.
Yeah, kind of thing, yeah. And she had about maybe 4 ceremonies over the course of 10 days. But yeah, she came home and she said, my depression is gone and I don't think it's going to come back. Which is very much not the, that's few people it's like that. Normally it's much more complicated. But that kind of stayed with me. But it was only when I went on maternity leave from the NHS that I had time to sit, because I've been so busy on this kind of treadmill of modern life.
Right. You were already a clinical psychologist and working in the NHS. You'd flipped from your literature degree to psychology.
Yeah, so I trained as a psychologist, and I was, seeing kind of seven people in a day. So, and working with the cognitive behavioural therapy model. So it's kind of, I was quite tired by it, and it didn't feel like particularly inspiring work. So it was only when I had my daughter that I was, breastfeeding at night, Googling things, And then, because of my friend Karis's experience with ayahuasca, started thinking, okay, I'm going to explore this. And it just turned out that there was a psilocybin for depression clinical trial happening just down the road from me. And I emailed them and said, can I come and, I'm on maternity leave, can I come and make tea or just chat to you?
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we actually need a therapist, can you start tomorrow? So I literally, and actually I have my dear friend Michelle sitting here with us, and we both, she's also a therapist, and we both started on the same day. We were both just completely thrown in the deep end of, so next week there's going to, you're going to be sitting for people with treatment-resistant depression. You're going to be their psilocybin session guides. So
and those are the sessions that are on the BBC documentary, which is called, can you remember the name of it?
Magic Medicine.
Magic Medicine,
Terrible,
which you'll
terrible
find
title.
I play it.
Yeah. Yes, but yeah.
And then, am I right in saying what you found, so you were on that clinical trial at Imperial College, and they had 2 integration sessions afterwards. The whole point really is that if you're going to take psychedelics to address mental well-being issues, you need to have it, you need to have psychotherapy with it as well. It needs to be embedded in that within a context, and it's called integration work. It needs to be integrated. And Imperial College had only designated 2 sessions afterwards, and you felt strongly that more than 2 sessions were needed. And so a company based in Holland agreed to take on the project, and you had 20 people from the Imperial College trial who were taken on by the Synthesis Institute. And you were starting to do integration, and that's when you invited me in, and we worked with 10 each. We had 2 groups. One was called the
Elder,
and the other was the Birch. Yeah, that's right. So we had tree names with these 2 tree groups, and you and I worked with the Elder, and Michelle and Greg worked with the Birch, and we did. And of course, this was all the time when the lockdown had begun, and so everything was online. And we did a fortnightly support group for them, and a monthly tree workshop. And so Rosalind said to me, I'm going to do these tree workshops, and there'll be 3 hours working with a tree. And I thought, 3 hours online? How's that going to work? And but they were just wonderful. People really benefited from it, and what was so exciting for me, it took me about 6 months for it to settle, because it was so extraordinary. I thought, I've spent the last 30 odd years working in the fields of psychology and psychotherapy and Druidry. And whilst I had been able to build a bridge from my understanding of psychology, and particularly transpersonal and psychosynthesis psychology, into Druidry, those of you may have spotted it somewhere in the core. I was able to bring in those ideas into Druidry, because I felt very strongly when I trained with Nguyen, it was all wonderful, but it was kind of not in tune with the spirit of the times. It wasn't psychologically informed, the Druidry that I was trained in originally. And I thought that would be a contribution that I could make. So I spent those 30 years doing that, bringing it in. But I didn't really have any traffic going from Druidry into psychotherapy and psychology, except in the most general kinds of ways. People would say, well, when you do therapy with people, how do you bring your Druidry in? And I'd say, well, I don't actually. But of course, there must have been some influences in there, but not direct, not overt in any way. What happened when Rosalind invited me on board into this project is suddenly the traffic started flowing the other way. I saw somebody who was a clinical psychologist working with the Imperial College clinical trial participants, working with trees and with the symbolism of trees and the spiritual meaning of trees, and using them in meditations to access deeper unconscious content. And that was just thrilling for me and exciting. So the last 18 months have been just fabulous. And that program was called the Connectedness Program, and it was all based around an understanding that you developed that one of the major problems in modern life and major problems in mental well-being is the fact that we often suffer from a sense of disconnection from the natural world, disconnection from our fellow human beings, disconnection intrapersonally as well, within ourselves as well. And so part of the healing process is putting reconnecting those different aspects. And what are you thinking now? Because I can't think of what to ask you.
Well, I'm just thinking back to those lovely groups. Actually, it just kind of reminded me when you were the names of the groups and just thinking about just remembering some of those workshops we had. And I think it was so in a way I'm intrigued to know actually for you as a psychotherapist how different it felt, the quality of those groups and how it felt in terms of that kind of connectedness, because for me, I think having been a clinical psychologist where I was a trained expert in providing something from a textbook usually, often something that I hadn't had lived experience of myself, in a context where there was this kind of shared understanding that I knew and that the other person was there to receive something and be fixed in some way. What a strange idea, really, that from reading something in a book that you would then be able to fix somebody else. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly, and one of the whole sort of really strong ideas in psychedelic therapy is the idea of the inner healer, isn't it? Really helping people open up to this deep healing that exists inside them. And my experience of those support groups was, do you remember the psychoanalyst from New York who dropped into one of our staff sessions one day and said, you mean you're getting a group of people suffering from depression all sharing together in the show? That's crazy. And I said, don't do that. Because
you're going to make them worse.
You're going to make them worse, because they're just going to spiral down, And that is a particular point of view within the psychotherapy profession amongst certain quarters. But what we found was absolutely the opposite, that these people, the clients were the experts. They'd been to those dark places that we hadn't visited ourselves. So they were there, and I found myself incredibly moved and touched by the way they supported each other. And sometimes it made me feel inadequate because they were doing it so well. But out of that, what is really lovely is the program that you've developed, the ACER project, because it's a project that's basically after a year the funding ran out, and we completed this cycle, and then it's like, what do you do? Everybody loves this program, but the funding's run out. What are we going to do? And this idea, you came up with this idea of peer-led support groups, essentially saying, look, you're the experts, so we're happy to be here for you to support you in whatever way we can. But actually, you can do this really well. You can actually do it better than us because you've had this lived experience, and so Rosalind has launched this ACER integration project. ACER because psychologists love acronyms, so it's like accept, connect, embody, restore, which is a sort of modality, an approach that Ros has developed. Of the sort of stages of healing or a particular path you can take, and let's just think about how that works for Druids now. Accept, connect, embody, restore, and of course ACE is also the maple tree. But so with this integration project, what we're doing is encouraging people to start their own groups, and then there's support behind that. There's a whole lot of other stuff as well going on. But just occurs to me, it'd be quite interesting to connect it with Druidry now and to see accept. The way so much of that idea, what you resist persists. And there's a whole strand in Druidry is about letting go, isn't it? It's about accepting the what is, accepting our place in the universe, in nature, and you almost, it's got to a stage now, right, where you say the word accept, and you can almost feel yourself relaxing. Say accept, and then connect. And of course, Druidry is huge on connections, all about connecting with stones and stars and trees and our fellow creatures and all the rest of it. Embody, huge one in Druidry. Druidry is really an embodied spirituality, rather than saying, hey, what is it, life is a bridge, cross over it but don't tarry, and all those sort of ideas, that can come, not always, but can come from the Abrahamic religions and from the Dharmic traditions as well, where you're essentially sort of trying to get out. In a way, Druidry says, accept, try and get in. A lot of us is trying to get out already for all sorts of reasons, because life is really hard and difficult, and there's lots of suffering in it. But it's like suggesting that the way in will really help. So embody spirituality, and then restore. Actually working with regeneration. And so part of your project for mental well-being, the ACER project, includes working with nature and actually planting trees. I told Ross that I said, I'm bound to talk too much, so please interrupt me for God's
sake. And there are so many links, I think, with Druidry. I don't know very much about Druidry, actually, even though, despite having the privilege of working with Philip for so long, I've been so kind of, I suppose, focused on what I've been kind of
building.
That I haven't really been so externally looking around. But I think Druidry, from the little I understand of it, and from what you've told me about it, and from what the trees have told me about it, I feel like there are so many resonances actually, and it's been really heartwarming to feel that there is a community of people who actually are embodying these principles already, and I think there's lots of resonance.
Great. Maybe it's time now to open it up and see if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask. Steve, I'm just wondering whether Steph, could we do something like running down with a microphone? Is that Steve over there?
Good morning. We're thinking back to the 60s and 70s of LSD was very much combined with music. The studies that you've carried out, have you actually combined it with vibration and frequency? Because as we know as Druids, we connect with trees on the vibration level. Have you been doing that with your studies at all?
So thank you for that question, because so often when we talk about psychedelic therapy, we forget to mention that the music is the therapist. So so in the kind of Western psychedelic therapy research, we use playlists. So they don't have that. In a way, I think some of that vibration and resonance from live music is lost. In ceremonial contexts, in ayahuasca retreats, there's often live singing and live playing of instruments, which is more powerful. But I was surprised by how much even a kind of playlist that we play through Spotify, even the power of them, and how participants describe it as being the kind of the handrail up through the experience of the landscape, and that when one track finishes, their experience shifts to something else, and the music is the heart of it actually. And for the integration process as well, after a session, we give people the playlists, and they will, and in the integration sessions, maybe play through a piece of music that they'd said at the time that we could see was a poignant one for them, and it helps them remember where they went. So then they continue to play those pieces of music after that to connect back to that state. But there is so much more to be done in terms of sound healing, frequencies. I sometimes get emails from people saying, do you know about the something or other hertz vibration that does this or that? And I'm like, I don't know anything about it, but I'm very keen to learn.
Hi, I'm Belinda. I am interested in finding out how the more mainstream psychotherapy world has received your research, and what sort of response has there been?
When I spoke to my psychoanalytic supervisors that I'd worked with previously about the work I was doing, this was about 5 or 6 years ago when I first moved into it, they were very, very cautious and said that their perspective was that that they work with defences quite gradually, and that psychedelics can overwhelm the defences very quickly. And like you shared about your sister before, we've many of us will have had stories of people whose defences were suddenly blasted way too quickly. So I think really at the time I fuddy-duddies, why are they being, and actually now when I think back to it, I think that there's so much wisdom in their perspective. And in a way, I almost wish there was more of those kind of cautious responses, because the response has been that there is such a hunger and a thirst for something that will make change because of the situation we are in at the moment in terms of, well, so many different areas that we're so desperate for change in, that there's been a huge interest and a desire to train as psychedelic therapists, and not just from therapists, but actually a lot of people that have had ayahuasca experiences wanting to become therapists and healers themselves. So if anything, there's been this massive influx of enthusiasm, inspiration and idealization. So I think we're probably at a time now where some of the kind of more cautious responses are more needed. Exactly, balancing the two out.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, you're a psychotherapist, so as well.
Yes, I think actually the psychotherapy world in general seems to be really quite enthusiastic, and there is so after around the same time as the Connectedness Program, I was invited onto a program, the Psychedelic Practitioner Training, and so in the last year I've been working with, and Rosalind has been working on it as well, with sort of about 65 people or something who are training in that, and then new waves of people are coming in on this training program that lasts a year and so on. But there was something else that I wanted to say, but it just escaped me, but it'll come back, and it's about the fact that lasting through defences and idealism and psychotherapy training.
Lots of people liking it.
And I really agree with Ross about her, about needing, funnily enough, there's so much enthusiasm that we need to temper it. But what I wanted to say is this: when I said that there's a revolution occurring in psychiatric medicine, I think it's really quite, if you take that phrase, it's really quite interesting, because it's occurring on two levels. The reason I said psychiatric medicine is because it is a revolution in medicine, in psychopharmacology, in as much as the kind of drug treatments for depression and so on have been pretty poor, really. If you look at it, really pretty poor. Lots to criticize there. And for the first time, there's a whole generation of drugs and massive amounts of research. Once you start to scratch this, you can find things on YouTube and online of pharma companies developing this. It's huge, millions of dollars being put into it to develop these drugs, because they seem to have such a powerful effect, and then potentially very therapeutic effect as well. So it's occurring in the psychiatric world, but it's revolutionary in another sense, is that it's bringing in the psychotherapy, and certainly from our perspective, psychotherapy is a vital component in this. So the psychotherapeutic world has to cooperate with the psychiatric world in order for it to be safe, and to be, precisely because they're so powerful. And this, for those in that world, will know that there's a revolutionary component in that too, which gets even more revolutionary because some of us, certainly there's a whole bunch of people who believe it also needs to include the spiritual perspective. So the institute I've been working with that does the training, we also include a spiritual component in that as well. And again, from that perspective, that's revolutionary as well. Yeah.
Florian, I'm curious to know how the patients that got no background in spirituality or Druidry are describing their inner journey in contact with the mushrooms, and do they get to accept the spirit and the wisdom of the mushroom as a being? How do they describe their initiation in this kind of therapy? And then the second question, do you use the frequencies of the mushroom themselves into music? That would be also interesting. Thank you.
Was that music that they were playing in that
the symposium?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Philip just reminded me that actually we did, not in the psychedelic therapy sessions, but there was an event put on by a friend of ours where we did listen to the music of mushrooms, different types of mushrooms, and the frequencies and the sounds they made. It was very beautiful.
It's like the Damanhur music, Plusic as it's called, where they wire up a plant, or in this case a mushroom. And it was lovely to hear the different mushrooms singing. It was really quite extraordinary.
And the psilocybin mushroom, I think, was the most beautiful sounding mushroom of all. But in terms of contacting the mushroom spirit, so it's, From what I've seen from the clinical research, it's been quite rare for people to talk about contacting a plant spirit. I would say for most people it's been very much kind of autobiographical, going back to traumatic experiences of their childhood. That's the kind of the bedrock of the experiences, and often contacting very, very painful emotions and often reliving quite traumatic memories. But probably roughly about half the numbers of people also contact something which feels spiritual or sacred or like an interconnectedness of all things. And I have heard of a participant in one study that wasn't one of our clinical trials but a different depression clinical trial where the participant apparently did contact the spirit of the mushroom who spoke to them about how the synthetic psilocybin that was being used in that trial was coming from an unethical source, and the mushroom said, this isn't good, you know, check your provenance. Yeah, so that was really interesting, and I think the participant fed that back to the guide who said to the people that were manufacturing the synthetic psilocybin that, you know, we've had some bad feedback here from the mushroom. but I think if people had more sessions, then perhaps that would happen more. I have heard more people in psychedelic ceremonial work talking about contacting plant spirits, but I think for the people that we work with, it was only 2 sessions, and there was so much to work through before they could feel their bodies, feel their own emotions, feel connectedness. So I think it might come a bit later. But even then, I have slight concern sometimes with how Michelle and I used to run an integration group in the community, and we'd have lots of people would come to this integration group who had been using psychedelics in ceremonies and at home, and they would often kind of say, you know, Mother Ayahuasca told me, or the mushrooms told me, and sometimes the messages they would absolutely translate these messages as absolutely like verbatim truth, that they had to make those changes to their lives, and sometimes so we came to be a bit cautious about always following the wisdom of the plant teachers, because I guess we're translating things as well, aren't we, in our own ways, and if we want to hear a particular thing, then we can, if there's something a bit ambiguous, we can translate it in the way that we want. So yeah.
Hi Rosalind, you mentioned the workshops with working with tree energy, tree symbolism. Could you talk us through one of those workshops, please, and what that involves?
Very gladly, yeah. Although how long have we got? Because this is where I start to like.
Yes. No. You just go for it, and I'll tell you if it's.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the inspiration for the trees came from. It was actually originally from. I read about the Celtic tree calendar. And I'm very aware that in this room there are many people with much deeper understanding. I mean, I don't really I don't have that understanding or lineage with this. So it was just a fascinating idea for me. And in a way, I kind of thought, oh, that's an idea, having a different tree each month and learning from that tree. And so I.
It's outside.
Oh, right, okay. Thought that was a contribution. So having that kind of that framework of the idea of having a tree teacher every month, and that you would then follow the same cycle like a spiral every year and deepen that connection to that tree. So there are 12 trees in this process, and they're not actually now the ones from the Celtic. Some of them I have borrowed from the Celtic tree calendar, but I've adapted it. So in a way, really, it's not linked to any kind of spiritual lineage. It's the idea that each month comes at a certain point in the passing of the year. So the dark half, the light half, and that really embodying that idea of the seasonal way of being restoring ourselves to the patterns and rhythms of nature. So I had come to this as a kind of clinical psychologist, very busily, always feeling like I should be, happy and busy and go all the time, and suddenly coming back into the idea of we have a dark half, and there's time to be restoring and coming inward. So the cycle of the trees is following the seasons, and so the workshops would be that So this month is June. So this is, we're in the deep high summer. So the tree for June is, and actually this is one from the Celtic tree calendar, is the hawthorn. So for the hawthorn tree workshop, the way it would work, and it's slightly different the way we worked on it together, and it's been slightly adapted now, but broadly, as a group, we together online, we do a tree journey, and that is journeying to a hawthorn tree. We imagine that we choose a hawthorn, we imagine a group of hawthorn trees. For this one, it's a circle of hawthorns, and it's actually based on an actual circle of hawthorn trees on Primrose Hill. There's an amazing circle of old ancient hawthorn trees. So you imagine them, and that they're just, they've been coming to blossom, and the blossoms have started to fall off. And you imagine the circle of trees, and you choose a tree, and then you imagine that you sit down at the base of the tree. And it's the same for all the different trees. It's just, a different type of tree, but it's the same process. And you imagine that there's from your kind of roots going down from you down to the floor, that you're kind of merging with the tree, that your torso, your trunk becomes the trunk of the tree, and then you connect with it, and you kind of become the hawthorn tree. And then you go on a guided journey, and you let the tree speak through you. You breathe in the carbon dioxide, you breathe out the oxygen, and there's some ideas around whatever that tree's lesson is. So this one would be around forgiveness and blossoming the thorns, the idea of the spikes, the thorny places, and then the blossoms coming in time, and how we can blossom, how we can do that process. And the first time we did the hawthorn tree workshop, we don't try and do everything in one go, because you're going to keep coming round to that in that spiral. You're going to come back to it next June and the June after, so you don't have to forgive everybody. The first June, you maybe just try and forgive yourself a little bit, just a little bit of forgiving yourself and blossoming some of your own thorns and bringing more of that beautiful, fragrant beauty in, of just that love energy. And then you know that the next June you're going to come back to the hawthorn, and you might that time maybe, forgive somebody else that you've been holding in that kind of thorny prison. You might blossom that relationship. So it's a guided journey, and it's set to music that's been made by some wonderful musicians who have made this bespoke music for each tree. They create a piece of music for each tree, and it's a recorded narrative of the journey set to the music. And then the most powerful part of it is the sharing circle afterwards, where we all the participants of the group share about, where did I go? What did I feel? And it's amazing, because having worked with psychedelics where people have these insights into things, turns out you don't actually need the psychedelics, that when people are together in this shared space, they can have very powerful insights and learnings.
Which, of course, will be a process very familiar to you, and so you can see how wonderfully aligned this is with the Druid work. And just to say that there's, of course, breath work in it as well, which helps to sort of deepen the experience. And then, if you can imagine, because this was all being done online, always being done online, then there's going into breakout rooms. And for those of you, one of the great contributions of the lockdown has been the discovery that breakout rooms are actually rather fun, that you're broken into a small group of people where you share. So I think for me, what was interesting in experiencing this process is that the tree is being used on the one hand as a metaphor, as a set of associated ideas that can trigger access to feelings and thoughts that may be a tad inaccessible or hidden or defended and all the rest of it. So gently using a tree as an image and metaphor, very gentle way of doing it, a natural way of doing it. But there's something else going on as well, which is actually, I think from a sort of magical point of view, is actually invoking the spirit of the tree, and
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm building up. What I'm going to say is important what you might be about to say, but I'm an orchardist. So my apple trees do different things at different times of year, and I never stop worrying about them. But what you were talking about, the cycle of the seasons, does that, that sort of, you go into the dark times a bit scary, but then the dark time becomes the dreaming time, and then the trees, the buds swell, and they offer this promise of the new. So they're always doing different things. But so you sort of touched on that. But what I would also then ask is, I know someone whose husband's just been over to Amsterdam, or Holland to the institute, and he's just done this microdosing. And how can I be of service to him back in the edge of Bath where we live?
But if you're an orchardist, you have amazing apple trees, then I think nature connection maybe this person already has access to wonderful trees and nature, but having walking together with someone who's interested to hear, because often when people have had these experiences, there's so much they want to share. There's so much that has come through, and that they would love to have someone just pure presence and listening. But doing that whilst you're walking through your orchard, I can't really think of a better thing for integration than that.
And the other thing you brought out, Matt, was the cycle of the seasons as well. And the other component in that is the recognising the eightfold wheel of the year and the value of that. Together, somehow the eightfold wheel of the year and working with trees are these two incredible what we call approaches or tools or methods. Yeah.
Hello, thank you, Marcus. I was interested in the longevity of the peer mentoring program, because obviously that's a wonderful thing, and there are some very successful, well-known groups around the world for just that, for the 12-step programs of various types, for example. And I wonder what the sort of safety and the structure of that is, particularly if you perhaps have somebody who falls back into the pattern of depression, and perhaps whether within that structure there's the facility to be able to recommend or signpost people to different, more appropriate things for their particular condition, or the cause of that.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and actually, so the community, this process is a peer support, is kind of supplementary to therapy, and we're very clear that it has to be, it's not a substitute for other forms of therapy, because it's in person, it's online, it's not in person, so it can't respond to somebody in a moment of crisis. But I think what's hard about it is that people really struggle to access good therapeutic care. So if we were in a system where we knew that people were plugged in to somebody somewhere that was really, really taking care of their mental health needs with them, and that they were really supported by a really, really good therapist. Like, I've been lucky enough to have an amazing therapist, but I've paid for it, and it's really hard to access it in the NHS, because so many people are suffering in different kinds of crisis. So our whole system is at the moment not really fit for purpose. So I think we have amazing kind of community organisations and charities and other things like that, but really, I think we're at a point where we really need to rethink how we approach suffering, crisis, how we think about mental health, and finding, because there's a lot of very kind of in terms of, there's lots of very cautious ways of, our lawyers always saying you can't do this and you can't do that and you might get sued for this, and there's an awful lot of caution around it, and there's a lot of services that can provide things for certain people, but not if you're too seriously unwell, because then, there are all sorts of ways that people are just not, people are falling through the gaps, people are desperate for help, and they don't know where to find it, and there are lots of doors that get closed in their face, or you're not quite this, or you're to this, and so I think we need to come back to the idea of communities where a smaller set, we've got these big sprawling ideas of communities, these national systems, but we need to come back to some kind of sense of community where people know each other, take care of each other, and just sit and listen to each other more, where there's just that sense of more patience and time. And I often think about the way we guide psychedelic journeys, and how so in our trial, when somebody was having a psilocybin experience, they would sit with this beautiful music in a beautiful room covered with natural materials and pictures of trees all around, and they'd have two therapists sitting there with them all day, holding their hand if they wanted, complete presence, anything, just there for them. And the next day as well, we'd have some hours the next morning. And I would think about how, when people are suffering from psychotic episodes, what it would be like if, instead of putting them in a psychiatric ward with fluorescent lights, loads of noise, terrible food, scathing opinions from your peers, patronising models of care, where if we actually were to ask that person to lie in that room and play them that music and hold their hand if they wanted it and listen to their insights or thoughts and gave them space, how that might change the process of that suffering. So I think really it's a really good question about how, you know, things can get really serious and how do we hold them when they do. And it's a question that I think there's the whole NHS services, community services, spiritual groups. It's something for all of us to find a way of coming together in communities and just holding each other with more care than we do at the moment.
Lovely things. That was really good. And just to say, Marcus, that the peer-led support groups, the idea is that that's sort of nested within a framework. If you can imagine having the Eightfold Wheel of the Year as a holding framework, I think that's really important. And because Druids are so familiar with that concept, we sometimes perhaps fail to realise how, because it's part of our kind of everyday life now, but there's an image I've got of the route to Lindisfarne, which floods. It's a holy island, and it floods every day. And if people get lost on it and they fall in the water and all that. So there are a series of poles stuck in the sand, and they just provide the route. So if the tide starts to come in while you're walking, you can get there. And from a mental health context, I think that can be really important. So the idea of having that as a holding structure, container, and then the tree work as well. Do you see what I mean? So that in addition to the peer-led support groups, you have these other layers of help, of support. I think that's really a step forward.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you both for that wonderful presentation. What's occurring to me is that using drugs and talking therapies is very much the sort of the stock in trade of psychiatric medicine. What do you think are the lessons from your study about integrating a spiritual dimension, and how might that be taken forward within mainstream psychiatry?
This is an opportunity for us to do the bias to wrap up. We've got 5 minutes to wrap it up with that.
So I think there's still a lot of resistance within mainstream psychiatry and science to these ideas. So I've just been writing a paper, the revisions, the process of trying to get it to the journal, because of the revisions within our team. It's taken about 4 years and it's still not quite there. And that's because within our team, I have a belief, or I have a sense that the paper is about the process of connectedness and the idea of connectedness as a transdiagnostic mechanism that lots of different kinds of mental health diagnoses, there's a fundamental disconnectedness there, and that improving connectedness to self, others and world would help a whole range of things. So in a way, coming out of those kind of diagnostic categories, but thinking more about how connected or disconnected we might be. And that I had a sense from my research with this that connection to spirituality was a really important part of that connectedness, and that many people experienced it. But in writing about that, my paper kind of kept coming back to me from others in the team saying, we can't talk about spirituality. This is a journal of psychopharmacology. We just simply can't say it. So it's one of those kind of head-scratching moments of like, well, how does this shift? How does it change? But I think in a way what's quite nice about it is that I think ultimately the revisions are going to, the spiritual is going to make it in there, because my point has been, it's actually anti-scientific to withhold something that is the experience of people saying themselves, I felt a connection to something spiritual. If we censor that and say that you can't say that, then that's anti-scientific. So I think from that perspective, hopefully we'll start to find that more and more people are just simply observing that many people that weren't previously spiritual are having some kind of spiritual connection, And as scientific journals start to publish that in kind of mainstream journals, hopefully we'll see a shifting of attitudes.
Absolutely, and of course, the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology would publish it straight away, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the if you have any more questions, do come and sort of talk to us afterwards or something like that. But we really need to finish and wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. So maybe to conclude, let me present to you this. What Rosalind's talked about, this model, and this is so. You will like this so much. I think it's just so you have the biological understanding of mental well-being and optimal mental health, and then you've got the social understanding, and you have people who have a biosocial understanding, the psychological understanding. So people talk about in the business, they talk about biosocial psychological understanding, biosocial psycho, and then surprise, surprise, somebody spots that there are actually some trees outside, and and people sort of feel better in the sunshine, and so they do great research projects about how being exposed to the colour green actually makes people feel better, and then you can read all the stats. Oh, people like the colour green. That's great. That's really. So we've got to drop eco in as well. So you have bio, social, psycho, eco thing, and then of course, but hang on a minute. There's something more than that. There's something more, and that's, for want of a better word, spiritual. What do you call it? Spiritual. Okay, it's all. And so this approach to not only to mental well-being, but I think we can say to life, as it were, to the mystery of being a human being on the earth is say the sequence.
Bio, psycho, social, environmental, spiritual.
Yes,
models.
eco. It's a mouthful of a model.
It's not going to catch on, it's too long.
But it's not going to catch on because it's too long. You'll have to think of an acronym. That's the approach. It's holistic and it's exciting, and I think it represents the future for lots of disciplines, actually. So thank you so much, Rosalind. I'm so glad you made it to Glastonbury, to one of these events. And thank you for everything.
Thank you, Philip.
Pleasure.